Hello, everybody, and welcome to the California Consulting Podcast, where we highlight the impactful work of California's leading grant writing firm. Since 2004, we've expertly navigated federal, state, and private foundation grants, securing over $1.6 billion through over 1,500 successful applications. Our team's 200-plus years of combined experience has benefited communities from San Diego County all the way to the Oregon border, enriching both flourishing and developing areas. Join us as we dive into our latest achievements and the diverse impact of our work across California.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is our first episode of our California Consulting Podcast. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Sam D'Ambrosio. I'm a management assistant for California Consulting. I'm here joined by Karen Leventhal, a grant writer for California Consulting. Karen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Karen Leventhal, and like Sammy said, I'm a project manager / grant writer with California Consulting, and I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Karen, first off, congrats on securing such a substantial grant for the City of Pittsburg. Can you start off by giving our listeners a little interview of the USDA Urban and Community Forestry Grant?
Yeah, sure. So we were lucky enough to receive, I think it was $2 million from the USDA Urban and Community Forestry Grant. So it's a really interesting grant. And the basic goal of that grant is to help communities develop a more robust urban forest. So what is an urban forest? It's an important question. I mean, an urban forest is basically the collection of trees that you have around your city. So, another question that might come to your mind is, well, why do cities need an urban forest? And your trees are really important to the life of a city. They help mitigate a lot of issues that are connected with climate change. So for instance, they keep heat from building up from all the kind of pavement and concrete that are typically in cities. So one, it's certainly keeps people safer if there's less heat and there's less chance of sort of heat events, heat stroke, that sort of thing. Trees also prevent erosion, so they're good at preventing flooding. And then I think in general, tree canopies are important for people's mental health. And I can tell a story about that later on. But the way the grant was looking at this, the way the USDA was looking at this is, one, how do we help cities develop better tree canopies, more, that are thriving, but also what does it mean to maintain it? Because as a city, you have to have the knowledge, you have to have the systems in place, you have to have, kind of expert staff who know how to select the right trees, who know how to maintain the trees, or else, they're going to fail and you're going to be right back where you started. So, if for instance, as a city, you're not selecting trees that are most suitable, like that for your climate or for the diseases that are present in the area, diseases. So if you select trees that aren't resilient, then it's you didn't do the job that you wanted to do. So this grant is really about looking at urban forestry from a lot of different angles, but giving cities the tools and the capacity they need to expand their urban forests and keep it really healthy and strong for the long term. So that's the USDA Urban and Community Forestry Grant.
That's very, very interesting. I know there's so many grants out there that help mitigate climate change, the heat. It's becoming a real problem in our country. So that's really great that the USDA, and I know multiple federal agencies are putting out grants to help mitigate these harmful changes. So thank you for that, Karen. I want to ask you, what inspired you to write this grant for the City of Pittsburg in particular?
Yeah, I mean, so at California Consulting, we definitely have clients that we work with all the time. So it is up to the choice of the client whether they want the grant written or not. But I can tell you what inspired me about doing it. So my background is in community development. I got a master's in community development from University of California at Davis, and it's kind of community development there's not that many programs out there. I guess it's really kind of a degree for hippies, but hippies and urban planners. which I guess describes me a little bit, both parts of that. So just I'm generally very interested in the ways that communities work and the ways that cities work, and how do you take care of all the systems that are needed to make a community thrive. So in general, that's my interest. I have a personal background in sustainability. In one of my previous incarnations in this life, I founded a tech startup company called United.Green. And United.Green was it's an e-commerce site, it's an e-marketplace, electronic marketplace that was designed to help businesses trade wholesale goods, so buy and sell wholesale goods that were more sustainable, that were greener, that were more ethically produced. So I have a lot of interest in, it's just sustainability in general, and how we move towards a more sustainable lifestyle and a sustainable world. But even like personally, I have like a personal story. When I was finishing up my graduate degree at UC Davis, and I decided to move to Los Angeles, and I had never lived in a city as large as Los Angeles. So I was certainly intimidated a little bit, but I just had never lived in a place with that much concrete. And so I was going on Craigslist, which is kind of where you found apartments at the time. And I would like talk to people. I would talk to people who were like wanted to sublet their apartments, or and I would ask them, well, I just, do you have like, is there like a tree? Is there like a really nice tree like in front of the apartment? Because I just really want to look out at a tree. And I kept asking people this question. And I think they thought I was a little bit crazy. They're like, it's Los Angeles. And I was like, but I really needed a tree to, I don't know, like to maintain my mental health. To not be able to look at a tree was really important to me. And so I would pick places that I just felt like there was at least a nice view of some tree. So I do think that having having an urban forest is important for people's mental health. I mean, and I think there's been studies that have shown that when there's a lack of trees, a lack of nature, like there's more crime, people are more stressed. So it's definitely something that I understand like on a personal level. So those are like a lot of the things that inspired me about kind of working on this grant with the City of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate that and all you do for sustainability. That's interesting about your United Green Company. I would definitely use that. I know our younger generations of people are very into making sure all their products are coming from ethically sourced places, carbon neutral, just to help, our planet and us live a little bit longer. So, just a question, where are you from, Karen?
I'm from Cleveland, Ohio originally, which is where I'm living right now, but I spent most of my adult life in California, went to grad school at Davis, and then lived for 14 years in Los Angeles and did a couple of tours of duty in Texas. So I lived for 3 years in Dallas, and that was my first place out of college, and I joined the Domestic Peace Corps, which is AmeriCorps. I was an AmeriCorps Vista member. And then I went back to Texas a second time and was living in Austin because it's a good place to try to do a tech company. And it's actually just a super fun place to live if you like music, live music, and I do.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Texas. I'm from Los Angeles, and like you said, I'm from a place that's in the suburbs of Los Angeles that's, very tree mountain filled. And then I recently moved to downtown LA where, like you said, concrete jungle. But thankfully I have a park nearby where I live, so I can have some of that peace. But I heard Texas is pretty nice. So
Yeah,
check
it's
that out one
a
day.
great lifestyle. Yeah, I mean, I lived downtown. That was my last place that I lived in LA, and I loved it. But I mean, this is a true story that I felt like I couldn't. Not only was I having a hard time paying downtown rents, but I just actually felt like my body. I just kind of felt like uncomfortable with the lack of nature. Like my body was like screaming to have some kind of nature around me, even though I love the hustle and bustle of downtown. So, and that was definitely one of the reasons why I moved back home to Cleveland. The good thing about this area of the country is I can walk 2 blocks and there's like it's like an hour and a half loop trail in a forest. So there's definitely more access to that. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just took a trip from LA to the Bay Area. First time I've been out of the 2 mile radius of my downtown location in a minute. And it was so different because there's so many hills and mountains up there. But I actually went to the city of Pittsburgh, actually, and I was like, oh, I know exactly what's going on in the city of Pittsburgh. Karen L just got a huge grant for them to make all these new changes in their city and bring upon some good consequences back to their city. So that was pretty cool to see.
It's
Yeah,
awesome.
so thank you for all that information. I want to ask another question about this grant, a little bit more about the USDA Urban Community Forestry Grant. So given the vast range of funding amounts, I know it says 100,000 to $50 million in award funding. How did you guys get the $2 million figure for the city?
Yeah, I think the funding question is really important because this is, this is what this is about, and the money is a catalyst to make changes. So for me, the amount of funding is usually one of the last things in a grant that we typically finalize, because what gets you the money is really that you have a smart strategic plan that's ready to go and that you have the capacity to do it right now. So in this case, if the city of Pittsburgh had asked for $10 million, it wouldn't have worked, because the key argument that we made in the proposal is that they didn't currently have the management capacity to solve their urban canopy problems. So if they had asked for all this money, how, it kind of wouldn't have been able to go to good use, because they just were lacking in capacity to put it to good use. So the money that we asked for was kind of connected to the problem that we identified and the solution that we identified. And that kind of dictated, well, what was the amount that we asked for. I did want to say a little bit something about funding, because I worked in nonprofit for several years. I spent a lot of years in kind of government run higher education. But actually what really shaped my view on fundraising is trying to raise money from private investors for my tech company. And I wasn't really good at it, but I am really good at raising public funds. But what I learned in the process of trying to raise from private investors really helped me. So when you go to raise from a private, like an angel investor or a venture capitalist, what they train you on, if you have a startup company, is investors want a 10x return. And a 10x return means if they give you $100, they want you to give them $1,000 back. So typically what they want to see is it's called like an exponential return. So if I have a business and my business currently makes $1,000 in revenue, and this investor comes along, what they want to know is, if I give you $500, I don't want you to make $2,000 in revenue. I want you to make $10,000 in revenue. So it means that they want to see that this money invested is going to have this much bigger kind of exponential effect than, than just, I don't know, a small amount of growth. And, I don't think that we don't, in this industry, don't usually think about, we don't think about the money in that way, because the government is not expecting a financial return. But they are an investor, and I do think about them as an investor, and they are expecting a social return. So when I think about writing and when we talk about the project, I really try to think about how can we talk about how this project is going to give an exponential return. So this is going to be the best use of money that they can give. And it was really easy to do in the city of Pittsburgh's case, because they had this very specific problem about capacity. So, and we found a really good story to show that. And the story is that the city has 74,000 trees to monitor, and they have no electronic system for monitoring those trees. So can you imagine, like, that you have 74,000 trees that you're responsible for? How do you know if one's, needs some, help, is sick, or if one's been removed, or if you have to how can you do your job if you have to go through 74,000, entries on an Excel sheet, or 74,000 pieces of paper? You can't move forward as a city until you can solve this problem of knowing what's going on with your tree, your tree canopy. And I'll go back to the business analogy, because that's typically like a really good business investment, that if a company goes to an investor and they say, look, my business makes 20 widgets every hour, but if you give me this money to buy a machine, I can make 200 widgets an hour. And that way I can, have this exponential investment. And that's kind of a lot, kind of what we did in this grant proposal, which is investing a lot in kind of electronic software so that the city can really get a handle on what's going on in their tree canopy, like what trees do they have, where do they have them, what is the health of each tree. So that's really was an exponential return from them, because they went from probably not being able to manage many trees at all. I mean, honestly, like, a couple hundred, a couple thousand, to now being able to manage 74,000 trees. So that's really kind of the story that I like to tell, and we were able to tell that story with this particular grant. So yeah, that's some thoughts about choosing your dollar amount and telling the story about it.
Yeah, that's very good information for some of our listeners. But 74,000 trees, yeah, I could not imagine having to keep track of every single one of that. So that's pretty cool. So all the $2 million is being spent towards that system, or is some of it towards the system to manage the trees and some of it is for implementation of trees?
Yes, both. So there's a lot of different pieces. But I think certainly a good chunk of it is about kind of getting that capacity and putting those systems in place. But then there's other parts which are about building other systems capacity. So one is just planting more trees. The other is training staff, so they have more expert knowledge. But yes, that definitely was a big piece, but not the only piece.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I know budgets are so finicky for grants, because it's some people get confused. They see the dollar amount and they're like, oh, between 100,000 and 50 million. Why don't we go for as much money as possible? It's like it's not really how grants work. So you telling our listeners a little bit more about why that specific dollar amount was chosen is pretty important. So you guys had to put together a budget worksheet, correct, and all that
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
So how difficult would you say it is to put together this budget worksheet?
Typically, it's something that I ask kind of the client to do as a first draft, just because I don't know. They really have more of a handle on, okay, well, how much staff time is this really going to take? And they typically done the research because they knew what their problem was ahead of time. So they did the research. Okay, how much is this tree software going to cost us? So my job, after they kind of take a first draft of it, and I look at it to make sure it matches up with the deliverables that we said were going to happen in the grant. So that's, so if we said we're going to do X, Y, and Z, then the budget has to match up with that. And I look for any things that they might have like overlooked on first glance. Just seems like there's, this is something that we said we were going to do, but there's not really any money allocated for it in the grant. And that might be perfectly fine. So it might be that they're going to kind of give staff time to work on this grant, but they're not going to ask for money for it. But those are the things that kind of need to be explained somewhere, usually in the budget justification, is that it just needs to all make sense about why you've asked for what you're asking and kind of why it's a good use of funds.
Okay. Yeah, so it's also good to know that, you don't just hop upon a grant opportunity and say, hey, let's apply for this. This looks like it's a good opportunity. So the city of Pittsburgh, they've been thinking about how they're gonna manage their trees for a while. And then they saw this opportunity and were like, oh, that's gonna fit us well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's that the people who work in the city, they're doing the work in the trenches, and they're facing whatever like daily frustrations are happening about, not being able to know what's going on as much as they want to. And so those are, whether in the front of their mind or the back of their mind, then I think when someone like us, like California Consulting, comes along and shows them these grant opportunities, and that kind of, I don't know, that frustration that they were experiencing, or like a wish that it could be different, is just, that's what comes to the top of their mind. And then Like usually people have like a pretty good idea, but we often like will talk through it and kind of flesh it out more. But that's usually
Hmm.
how I've seen it work.
Okay, that's really great to know. Okay, so how do you see this grant impacting the landscape and community of Pittsburgh in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
So, again, one of the things about grant writing is that there's it's about a long-term investment. So the idea that once now Pittsburgh has this software, they're really going to be able to kind of better manage this portfolio of trees they have for decades. And they're going to know, which trees need to be replaced. And they're going to know which trees are the most resilient in their climate and in their city. They're also going to know which areas of the city have more tree covers than tree cover than others. So which of the areas of the city that kind of need more trees and more help. They're going to know which trees are, so they can, even in this software, they can do things like calculate the carbon emissions or the carbon sequestration. So how much, so trees are kind of carbon stores and they're taking in carbon from the atmosphere, which we need. And that software will kind of give calculations on which tree, like how well they do this. So they might find, that maybe they want to replace it with different trees that store the carbon better, but these are all information that they'll have at the tip of their fingers. So they will be able to, I think, make the tree canopy thrive. The other thing is they didn't really want to keep this information to themselves. They wanted to share it with the residents, with the community. So they're going to put this information on a kind of online GIS map. There's another piece of software that we got through this grant called Story Map, and it allows, I guess, cities to map what's going on in communities and share it with the residents. So all this information about the trees will be online. So if anybody wants to go on and they want to know about like what trees are in their neighborhood, like down to the tree, they'll be able to get that information and know about this particular tree and like what it's called and what kind of care it usually needs. So that's all kind of educating the community to really, I think, value the trees in their neighborhood and know more about them. The other part of the project was, so they were going to plant 450 trees in the community, both on public land, public city land, and then on private residence lands for private residents who wanted to do that. So it's really like another way for them to build connections with the residents to help them, care about trees, the trees on their property. So they'll get to go through that process of like learning about what this tree is and go through the process of planting it. And then the city will come out and kind of make sure the tree's doing well and offer advice. So it's really all this knowledge, is going to be dispersed among the community to educate the community. So the whole community is going to have hopefully more knowledge of these trees in their neighborhoods and more investment in the tree canopy. And they're also, again, as I mentioned earlier, doing training of staff to get more a specialized like arborist certification so that, the staff is well equipped to make good decisions and choices about the tree canopy. So those are other things, and we can talk about like also the health issues if you want, about like the health issues going on in Pittsburgh and how the trees might like more trees might impact that.
Sure, we'd love to hear about that. I mean, just hearing first of all about the software and the involvement that the city is having in this tree planting, this tree care, and learning a little bit more. I can see why the government chose to give the city the funding to be able to implement this project. It sounds like a great project. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about the how it's going to help the health issues in Pittsburgh as well.
Well, I know that we were going to talk a little bit about kind of how the grant works with underserved communities. And for this particular grant, we didn't have a specific area of the city that we were going to drill down on, basically because that was part of the problem, that the city doesn't have enough information to really drill down to different neighborhood levels. So, so we didn't specify neighborhoods, but that was part of like the problem that we were trying to solve. So it wasn't just because we were lazy and didn't want to drill down. So how we made the case about how it was underserved. Well, one, we're trying to show that this is a community and neighborhood that doesn't have equity with its neighbors. So we knew that there was some neighboring cities, wealthier cities, that they all had this tree software. I mean, this was how they did business, and the city of Pittsburgh didn't. So one, that's a contrast showing, okay, these wealthier neighborhoods have this tool and the city of Pittsburgh doesn't. And as it would have it, in contrast to these wealthier neighborhoods, we found the city of Pittsburgh had a higher pollution burden. So they were in the top like 25% of the state in terms of the pollution burden, which is probably largely because they're an industrial area. And that's something you're going to see in a lot of, I'd say, working class communities or lower income communities, is that they do tend to be more industrial than wealthier neighborhoods. So there's going to be more pollutants typically. And one of the things about trees is that they absorb pollutants. So then we're kind of showing that the city they have this lack of equity. They probably don't have as many trees as their neighboring cities, and they really need it because they're the ones who are having kind of more industrial pollutants that they really need to take care of for the health of the citizens. And we know that this is impacting the health of the citizens because we were able to find some data to show that City of Pittsburgh is in the 98th percentile in terms of its asthma rates, which meant, this is in the top 2% of residents with asthma. And these things are typically can be linked. There's higher pollution, there's more asthma. So the trees are really important to get in there and manage properly to deal with respiratory conditions, so that they can do their job of absorbing pollutants. So that was kind of something that we hope for the long term, that the cities, that this tree project will have for all the residents of the city.
Yeah, I hope so. I know my uncle, he struggles with really bad asthma and he lives in the desert, so that's not very helpful. I know he'd do good with some better air quality. So that's really great. That's really good to know. I hope the city of Pittsburgh, they take off, they go in a more positive direction from this grant. So another question, I'm sure it was not an easy application to write, and our listeners would love to know any tips, any advice that you have for aspiring grant writers in general, and especially those who are targeting projects such as this urban and community forestry grant project.
Well, I think what I can talk more generally about it. So for me, like the devil's in the details. I think there are a lot of people that are talking about, Chat GPT, which is this new artificial intelligence platform, and they're saying that like grant writers are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. And I don't think that's going to happen, because grants are typically, all about specificity and telling a very specific story. And Chat GPT and that kind of artificial intelligence is typically around gathering common knowledge and making it sound good, which is fine. But I think for me as a grant writer, I want to find the insights that are not commonly known. So that's why, I talk to the clients, and I'm, really trying to kind of pull out from them, like, what are the insights that they've been thinking of that they might not have told anybody, that everybody wouldn't know, because they're the ones who are on the trenches. So we're in the trenches. So I'm trying, what I kind of want to do is, in a way, like present the grant as a little bit of like a TED Talk. I mean, as much as I can, where like they're going to present their insight that nobody else has heard before, specifically about this particular community. And so that's what I'm trying to find, so that we're letting the funder, we feel like the funder feels like this is like a really important new insight about how to do community work that they haven't heard before. So finding that specificity is really important. On the other hand, when you're writing the grant, you don't want to get lost in the weeds. And I think that's why grant writers are really important and helpful. Because I found when you're working the job yourself, you can get really lost in the details in terms of when you try to write about it. You're making all these assumptions about what somebody else understands because you and everybody, that you work with understands, but like a reader might not understand. So as a grant writer, I think our role is to really distill what's most important about this story and this proposal and tell it really simply. So tell it in like really simple language. When you go to college and you go to grad school, like I did, they often train you to write in ways that like are really obtuse and to use really big words and multiple big words. And my role as a grant writer, and I think the role of the grant is not to like impress the reader that you're so smart, it's to educate the reader. So I try to write like a journalist. I think journalists, you're supposed to write at like a 5th grade level. So I really try to write as simply as I can. So to make sure the most important thing is that they understand what's going on. Because you just, when you're in the middle of it, you just assume everybody understands your job and what you do, and they often don't. So to write very simply, I was also a grant maker. That's why I kind of understand that sometimes with people who read these grants, they might be bringing in kind of community members who are not technical. They don't work for a city, but there are people who might be impacted by this kind of a thing. So they bring them in, but they don't have a background in these technical terms. So I try to not use that much technical language. And if I do, I try to explain it. And so that's why, again, I would advise people to talk really simply, because and to explain things in a way which is like flows, and it's like a story where, okay, first this happened, then that happened, then the third thing happened. And so that makes sense as like a sequential story. Because if a reviewer, even if they're technical, even if they understand a lot, they read a lot of these grant applications, they get tired. When they get tired, they don't take in information well. And then when they don't take in information well, they get confused. And when they get confused, they score an application less. So the goal is to make it a pleasurable read where they're not confused. So I would say write simply if you can.
Okay, that's pretty good advice. Good to know. Thank you, Karen. Finally, how do you see this grant impacting? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. We already did that question. Lastly, are there any upcoming projects or grants that you're currently working on and you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, like right now, most of the grants I'm working on are also related to the environment and to the outdoors. One of the big grant that a lot of cities are working on is from the California Parks Department. It's called Outdoor Equity. And it's a really cool grant because it's really trying to bring environmental experiences and outdoor experiences to disadvantaged youth and disadvantaged families. So, I think it's a really good grant because the Parks Department is really trying to address both what's going on in these communities in the short term and in the midterm and in the long term. So in the short term, they really want to just expose communities who might not have access to, might not have transportation or know how to camp, or might not, get education about what's going on in their natural environment. They just want to have that exposure. And they also want to support communities to go to state parks. So that's part of the grant, is that at least once, go to a state park. So they want people to develop, I think, an investment in the nature in their community and the beautiful nature of the state parks. And then midterm, they really want cities to bring on interns. So young adult interns who will take, responsibility for part of, the activities. And I think they really want to train kind of young people to take leadership, to prepare them to be like the next generation of environmental leaders, or to be civic leaders, or just to care about these issues. So that's a really interesting part of this grant. And then they want the cities to be mentoring the youth who go through the program afterwards. So they're really thinking about this like in this long-term way of, doing this initial exposure and getting people excited about it and getting them to invest in the value of nature, and then training them for leadership. So it's really cool. I think it's a really cool grant that the park system puts out.
Yeah, you said outdoor equity, right?
Outdoor equity.
Outdoor equity from Cal Parks. You guys heard it from Karen L. That's the next one to look forward to. So thank you so much, Karen, for all your time, all your fantastic words about the community, urban and community forestry grant. We really appreciate it. Any last words before we sign off?
I mean, I think there's a lot of exciting grants out there, and I will say that I have friends who live in Europe, and they are not very they don't have faith in their governments as a government to support the growth of the cities. And so I'm really happy because I do really support, and I'm really excited about the kinds of grants that I see coming out of the government. And I think they're really smart, and they're trying to move, communities forward. And so I don't take that for granted, because there are apparently some places in the world where there isn't that thing. The government doesn't support that kind of smart development and growth. So I guess that's the final word. I'm just glad that there are grants out there that we can help our clients get.
Yes, agreed. Thank you. We are so lucky to have you, Karen, on our California consulting team. For everyone who's listening out there, Karen Leventhal, she is a fantastic grant writer. You see her name attached to almost every other award that cities are getting. So you hear her passion, you hear all that she's doing to help the community, and know that she's getting the awards. So thank you so much for your time, Karen. We really appreciate it. Till the next time, I'm sure you'll get the next award in the coming weeks. So thank you so much. Yeah, fingers crossed. All right. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, listeners. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the California Consulting Podcast. The stories we've shared today are a testament to our team's dedication to make a tangible difference across California. With an unparalleled track record in securing grants for various critical projects, we at California Consulting are dedicated to transforming potential into success. Whether it's for affluent neighborhoods or underserved communities, our mission is to bridge gaps and create opportunities. Stay updated with our latest achievements by following us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Follow our newsletter and visit our website. Remember, for turning your visionary projects into funded realities, California Consulting is your go-to partner. Until next time, we encourage you to keep pushing boundaries and innovating for the betterment of your communities.